Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about outdated practices. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, half a year ago I joined a team with true dinosaur code. Most of the front-end devs don't know what promises are, and it's hard to read complex and with a callback architecture. Fortunately, they didn't forbid me from writing my code with promises and async if I really want, but most of the code is still using ancient practices. What can I do to change their minds and convince them to use modern JavaScript? I'm trying I'm not even trying to convince them to use React, since that is straight down impossible. Well, uh, what I would suggest to you is that you first and foremost have to put yourself in the right mindset here and set your expectations a little bit realistically. And so this is something that's going to be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, I think. And it is, as I like to say, one of the main insights that you can get to in order to have a more, let's say, a calmer emotional state when you reflect a bit about why a lot of things that in our world doesn't work all that well. In our societies we have tons of flaws and issues, and tons of things are not working as well as they could. uh, the thing that I usually say is that you have to understand, guys, that even if you know how to do something so that it works better, like you can obviously see a better solution to this, that may not necessarily be feasible. Even if it's, as I like to say, the problem is almost never that we cannot technically solve a problem. It's usually the case that you have a lot of people in the way. And those people, unless you want to take a very morbid approach and start, getting out those guillotines we had back in the day, you're not going to be able to just say, hey, we're going to go do this, and then that's the end of the story, which is incidentally one of the things that a lot of politicians and powerful people have realized, that most of the time having the right rhetoric, the right narrative, and persuasion skills is superior than having a lot of knowledge, which is sad, but in some cases it's very, very true. This is one of those situations. You know how to do A, B, and C, or in this case, fix your code base and make things in a better way, in a more modern practice and so forth, but you have coworkers who don't really care. And as they say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink. And that is the situation that you find yourself in. If your coworkers can't be persuaded to learn, then your only other option is to apply authority. And I'm just going to guess that you have no authority, which means that you don't have the necessary leverage to resolve the situation. The only option you have is persuasion. So if persuasion doesn't work and you can't force them, then give up and change jobs or go and do something else. Or I will help you, give you some tips of what I've usually found to work really, really well in these such situations. But this is now, I'm gonna be a little bit blunt with you here. I suspect that the situation that you find yourself in is too difficult. Where the techniques that I will talk a little bit about is at a higher level, is usually something that you apply when you're dealing with a role where it's your job. It's where this sort of thing that, let's take me as an example, where I usually am involved, like trying to fix these such of issues in a team, and it still requires a bit of authority to do this, but I will tell you about them. So to just get it said and get it out there as quickly as possible, I don't think you're going to solve this one, my friend. Because the reality is, and this goes for everybody, guys, you will be, and I promise you, I've been in many situations, in many companies, where you will be among software developers who have the job because their manager doesn't really know that they're not all that good at what they're doing, and the manager won't help you. And these people are a little bit pig-headed or bullish or something like that. They don't care about the craft of software development as you do. They don't care if they're using the modern stuff. They care about that they can go home when they feel like it, or when it's appropriate, and pick up their kids, or whatever they're doing. That's what they care about. And they couldn't give two shits about if there are unit tests or if the system is working and so forth, because it's just another story card to them. And if you find yourself in such a situation, as I said, your two options are persuasion and authority, always. The politics. Now, let's talk a little bit about the politics of the thing. The important thing that you have to understand is that your best bet, in my opinion at the very least, is that you have to create a path forward for the people that you're trying to influence. In other words, if you just tell people that, oh, you can do this thing in a better way, or you can do that, nothing's going to happen usually, because the problem is that you're dealing with people who don't really want change. And when you're trying to persuade people to change something, you really have to get them into the mindset that, oh yeah, I understand how to make the change, and it seems feasible for me to make that change. And then you have to do the big thing, which is, for some people, the sales department, they will talk about getting the yes. I usually say, for us software developers, it's a little bit different. You can call it the same thing, get the yes. But in my opinion, it summarizes it better by saying, get them to try it. Get them to try and experiment a proof of concept. If you can get them to the proof of concept, then you've won the battle, basically. How you get them there that's the sort of thing that I usually do, is that you create a situation where you have example code of how to do things properly. You create like a small base of example. I like to call it template code. Basically, you start working on a story. So this is how. This is one of the things that I usually do for companies when they hire me for this role. They treat me a little bit like a special forces type of person or something like that, where basically what they do is that they ask me, hey, how do we fix these sorts of low performance team? And then they send me in. I work with the team. I don't mentor or anything like that necessarily. All I do is I pick up stories and I start working on them so that I can build up a small section of code where I can show certain practices or so forth that have been working for me. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say that I always have the best coding solutions, but I can usually give you some examples of how, at least based on my understanding of modern practices, things should work. And then I make a little presentation, I walk it through with my coworkers and so forth, and if I get a general good response from them, because here is where those soft skills really matter. If you know your shit, you know how to speak the lingo, and you know how to present and do a little bit of storytelling and have those empathies, emotional intelligence qualities, you can usually get people to at least see that there's a merit to the thing. And then you have constructive, healthy arguments with people, and then finally, if it's persuasive enough, they will go, okay, yeah, this makes sense. You're not going to get them to just say, yeah, I've changed my mind. Some of them will, but most of them will just go, yeah, we could probably try this out. If you can get them to that stage, then the next step is the thing that I usually do. Now you have to make it happen. Okay, so how do you convert all these people over to the thing? That's a whole different video, guys. Because basically what you're doing is that you're shouldering the responsibility of converting. You're winning hearts and minds in essence, and you're trying to convert it. If I have resistance in this phase, this is usually how I start the thing. If I see that, yeah, I have people I can't persuade them, I can't get them anywhere and so forth, then I go to my manager and I say, okay, unless you give me the authority to fire A, B, and C, then this is not going to happen. And then I leave it to their discretion how they want to deal with the situation. Because the reality is, I'd like to think, a good enough software developer that, as I like to say, guys, I can write shitty code really well. I don't have to use React to make the code work well. It's in the company's interest, perhaps, to use React, as you were saying, or modern JavaScript practices and so forth. But the reality is that even with outdated practices, I can make this thing work because I've made sure that I know how. And I might not be the happiest developer on the planet when I have to do that, but I can make it work. And so now I have to ask myself some tough questions. Is my desire to work with modern JavaScript so high that I will quit this job over the topic? Or can I figure out a creative way of making these older practices work really well for this project as well? So what I want you to take away from this is that the good old carrot stick is the one and only thing that I've ever seen work in situations like this. I don't really know of a better way of dealing with it. So if you're dealing with a team that are using outdated practices or anti-patterns and so forth, my suggestion to you is, as always, realize that unless you have a manager or something like that, we are working in an expert democracy, as I like to call it. If you don't have a voice of authority or anything like that, then all you have is persuasion. And most of the time, most companies want you to deal with both. It's really rare, guys, that you have those almost cartoonish ways of dealing with issues where you just go in and say, I will fire you if you don't do A, B, and C. Usually the pattern is always, you bring in someone who really knows their stuff, you educate people in how to do things, quote unquote, the correct way, and then you start getting them to say, okay, this seems to be feasible, let's try it. And then after a little while, you see that the people who usually are inclined to help out, they will start making comments and pull requests, they will start adding more and more code, and you shift over the pattern. You're basically breaking habits. That's what you're doing. And that is usually the way it's done. And authority, like those sort of shopping block type of ideas, usually only work when you're dealing with someone who is truly pig-headed. And I've dealt with people like that as well. And this is where authority and seniority really comes into play here. A junior has a very hard time settling this, but for me, I've gotten to a point where I have the mannerisms of someone who seems fairly experienced and so forth, which gives me a lot of credibility. So when I go to my manager and I say that A, B, and C are incompetent, or like they don't really know what they're doing and so forth, they're very willing to listen to me usually, and I can make a good case for it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to fire these people. It's just that now they are aware, and then I have other tricks up my sleeve that can sort of emphasize the incompetence that we're dealing with. These are very advanced techniques, guys, which we can talk about in a different sort of video, but the basics of it is that you're going to have to educate people, and in many cases you do a lot of like proof of concept coding to just build up enough in order to make people make that switch. You don't really have any other choice, and if push comes to shove, you will have to ask yourself that question: am I willing to go and work in another team or take another job over this? Have a great day.